Hi, everybody. Elaine and Diane here.
Welcome to another episode, but this one's not quite the same kind of episode.
No, this is really fun. We have, our team has pulled together some of the best of from the year. And so you're going to get some really cool conversations with that we've had throughout the year with clients in various programs and various groups and private coaching and all kinds of things to talk about the successes they've had and how they've used the coach approach and what a difference it's making in their life.
Well, and hopefully it's an inspiration to you. I think that, it can be really, there's this double-edged sword, right? With Elaine, when you're listening to a success story, it's like, oh man, I can't believe we want to celebrate for them, but listen and look for insights for yourself rather than like having it be a reflection and a comparison game. So that would be my only warning is like, don't go into the comparison game. Like just learn from it and maybe take a minute to celebrate some of your successes as well.
Awesome. So, and I listen to them, so I will tell you, I guarantee inspiration. So enjoy and talk to you the next one. What I want to guide us to talk about from here is, so you came into our community and to Coach Approach as a coach. Mm-hmm. There was something about it that resonated for you differently. And to such an extent that you began to become certified in it. And even though you're not technically working with parents as a coach now, you're working in a professional capacity, there was something about this neurodiversity informed coach approach that we teach at Impact Parents that really spoke to you. So will you talk a little bit about what was it that got your attention to the point that you actually wanted to continue your training in this arena?
So I'll start by outing myself as a straight to solutions, fix it type. That's just my orientation, has been really my whole life, and is actually one of the things that made it possible for me to be as successful as I am, despite the amount of neurodivergence sitting around in my family tree and in my own personal experience. So I'm like, problem, how am I going to fix this? Problem, how am I going to fix this?
Right.
And
it's part of what we love about her, y'all.
Yeah, it's true.
And I get very creative and I get very nerdy and I like to look into these things. And also there's a lot of value in the get curious and the slowing down and the observing and taking time. So that was one thing that I saw that I needed support in as a parent, as a coach, as a professional, where your program helped me slow down and dial into that bit. Mm-hmm. The other bit that I found just really wonderful was how the shifting expectations. How do you shift expectations to the kid you have instead of the kid that you're supposed to have?
Right.
Well, I could keep going because there are so many different pieces that resonated for me, but that taking aim and the one thing at a time. And are you really sure you're down to one thing? Mm-hmm. Are you taking aim on what you're curious about, or are you taking aim on a solution? I mean, that for me was where the learning, growing edge. And secondly, it was like finding my people, like just the kind of the congruence, like it just felt like the right home for me.
Yeah. Well, to talk a little bit. So now, I mean, you've been connected to this for a long time. Mm-hmm. When you think about your own practice as a coach, are there components, are there things that you've been using and doing and building into your work on a regular basis?
Absolutely. It's, I mean, there are some go-to coaching questions that I've just internalized from you guys. What are we taking aim on today? Or, how does that resonate for you? Some of it is just the presence you bring to your coaching, both individual and in groups. I like to find good models and hang out with them. So did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think you did. I think what I'm curious about is, for other professionals out there, it's like this sort of who are curious about our training program and becoming, a Sanity School certified trainer, are there words of wisdom that you would give them about, the value that you've gotten from having gone through the training as a professional?
So that's at a couple of different levels. I mean, ultimately, I did it because as a parent, this stuff was too good not to share.
Mm.
As a parent, as a professional, this was too good not to go into deeper.
Mm.
And as a deeply ADHD person, I know myself. I could spend a very long time attempting to reinvent the wheel when I could just hook up with you guys and use your wheel with a license, with permission, with training, with supervision, and get a lot further than if I was still, sitting in my office, chipping away at how do I want to put this all together into something. So it's really about knowing myself really well and designing for what I need. But ultimately, it's because the work that you two do is too important not to be pushing it forward, not to be making it more visible.
Thank you for that. Tell us about your role as a mom in a family with a complex kid and how this kind of evolved for you.
Sure.
To bring you here.
My husband and I adopted our child at birth. And at that time, I didn't know really much about ADHD. I'd been a classroom teacher for 13 years, but this was 1999. And up to that point, they weren't really identified too much in my classroom. I taught English. And all I knew really is that they were hyperactive kids. So when the birth mother wrote me a note and said that ADHD ran in the family, I thought, okay, no big deal. That's just going to be maybe a slightly hyperactive girl. And anyway, it's boys. It's not usually girls.
Mm.
And so it really was something that I dismissed. And it wasn't until preschool that a red flag went up, because I was treating my child as typical. I had no idea that there were a whole other raft of things going on. So I was going down the typical path of parenting, and first we're going to go to preschool with the expectation that we would go to kindergarten on time. We would eventually graduate from high school and get that college degree. I had very traditional expectations as a mother.
Right.
But when we hit preschool, it was a bit of a red flag I should have addressed at the time. We walked into this classroom and there was a ball pit and a slide on the right, and a teacher on the left who was doing circle time, and all the kids were sitting very quietly in their mother's laps, listening to the book that was being read. And I tried to go over there with my child, who immediately dove out of my arms into the ball pit, started throwing balls all over the room. And it was everything the teacher and I could do to lure her into the circle with an Elmo. But then she grabbed that Elmo and put it in every face's child to kiss, and then ran for the slide, dove back down the slide, and landed in the middle of the circle, disrupting everybody. So I ended up in a timeout, if you can believe it. Mommy and me timeout in a parking lot in this hard white plastic chair with my back to the class, because this was supposed to teach my child a lesson.
Oh,
and of course,
wait. Oh, wait a minute. So we started, your very first encounter with this after this red flag was parent shaming. Good. Let's start with what's wrong with you that you can't control your child. That's
exactly.
Wow. Oh, my heart's with you. I'm so sorry.
I sat in that parking lot crying, thinking, what is wrong with me? I was a teacher. And so I should be able to control this child. What's wrong with me?
Well, do y'all hear that? What's wrong with me? Right?
Exactly.
That was the first thought. There can't be anything going on there. So what's wrong with me? Exactly. And it's so funny because the red flags, my red flags, I think started before preschool, but I remember the preschool ones, and it was trouble with scissors.
Oh,
it's okay. And social anxiety, and all these other things. So the flip side of the hyperactive,
Right,
as hyperactive
right.
as this kid was typically, was the withdrawal.
Mhm.
Right? So it shows up in lots of ways.
Right.
Okay.
Well, it really did. So we did go on track for kindergarten, which again, I wasn't paying attention to the fact that my child wasn't learning her letters really easily. And I thought, once again, as a teacher, I can fix this. So I found I found a phonics program called Zoophonics for kinesthetic learners, because I knew by that point she was a kinesthetic learner. She learned by touch. And with that, I was able to get her through kindergarten and into first grade. But that's where everything really fell apart.
Right.
And one day I went into the classroom and I saw my child cowering under a desk. And I went up to her and I said, "What's the matter, honey?" And she said, "I'm the dumbest person in the class, Mommy."
Oh.
And it just broke my heart. And I knew at that point, I have to get help for my child.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the beginning of my journey of really accepting that my child was different and had issues that I was going to have to address.
Yeah. And there's so much to that discussion of acceptance, right? Like I have, as you're bringing this up, I'm experiencing my parallel journey, right? The decision about whether to go into kindergarten or first grade. And because they were so smart, we decided to go ahead and go into first grade, even though there were certainly indications that the extra year would have been helpful. And then the first grade, and like how happy they were to go to first grade. And then I remember so vividly, I still have a photograph of them sitting at a desk, and I was so proud they're doing their homework for the first time before the tears, right? And the 2 hours to do 10 minutes of homework, 2 hours.
Yes, sounds very familiar.
Right? Boy, that should have been a clue, shouldn't it?
Well, my child went to the extent of headbanging against the couch.
Yeah.
When it was homework time. I can do this. I mean, it was, yes.
And as a parent, you're like, you see how smart your kid is, right? So
exactly.
You don't really understand how that whole effort thing works in executive function.
Exactly.
And you just want to support them in achieving, right? And even though you're coming to acceptance, which is what I hear you speaking to, that's a process too. That doesn't just happen on a dime.
Oh, no. You really have to go through a process where you grieve your typical child.
Yeah.
And also, just to give a little perspective to this time, we're talking the early 2000s when Google was in its infancy.
Yeah.
And
so available.
Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that was yet to come. And so not a lot of moms were talking about ADHD, even if their kid had it, or other issues. It wasn't something that was readily discussed. Mm-hmm. And I did feel embarrassment when my child's behavior was out of control. And then shame that it was something I was doing wrong. And it wasn't until, we went on from there, and my child was diagnosed with classic ADHD, and we were sent to a neurologist for medication counseling. And then along with medication came a diagnosis of sensory processing disorder and mild anxiety. Yeah. And it was really the sensory processing disorder that led me down a path that would really help Lee get through elementary school. And that's because, as you know, medication isn't a magic bullet.
No.
It did help Lee focus better in the classroom, but her behavior was still very difficult for her to manage. So we went to occupational therapy for sensory processing disorder.
Yeah.
And through that, she was given a sensory diet, which became the way I could get her to school. The way I could get her into the classroom and more able to focus and learn.
Yeah.
And do you want me to tell you about it?
I was going to say, was your morning like ours, which was spinning on the thing first and maybe a little crash pad and some brushing? And
it was swaddling in a blanket and doing the burrito wrap.
Yeah.
And feeling like a cave woman dragging her down the hall behind me. wall slams. I don't know if you did those. A heavy backpack for deep compression, always walking to school for the hyperactivity. And then coming up the back path and going to the classroom and doing spinning, like you're saying, holding our hands out. And all I wanted to do was throw up. But spinning helped her vestibular sense, her sense of gravity. And it really grounded her before she went into the classroom. And then a rubber spiked pillow, that sensory aid for tactile stimulation, which she sat on. Yeah. And that became very special in the classroom. All the kids wanted to.
They all did. They wanted this. It was different, but same, right? And at some point there was sensory jewelry. It's like, so you could wear that so they could chew on it. Right. So, oh my God, it's so fun to have this conversation and laugh, but it wasn't funny at the time, you know?
No, and I was the only one doing it.
Yeah.
And because of, I don't know, maybe because I'd been a teacher, I just felt really strongly that I had to put some kind of system in place in the mornings and some kind of, assistance in the classroom so that she would be more able to learn.
I fell into coaching kind of by accident because I had a friend, an English friend in Mexico where I live, who is a coach. And I thought it sounded so fascinating what she was doing. So I hired her as a coach. And the funny thing is, it coincided with this period in my life where I felt like I was looking for something and I didn't know what, which sounds really nonsensical. But it turns out that what I was looking for actually was coaching. And I think what it boils down to is I was looking to understand this idea of self-awareness, which I'd been in this sort of reactive mode as up to then in my life without really understanding that we can observe ourselves and we can choose to do things differently if that's what we want to do. And that's what coaching gave to me, that window of understanding about self-awareness. And so then I started to apply it in my daily life with my kids, with everything, with everyone around me. And I really noticed the difference. It just felt like I was a different person all of a sudden.
What was different?
I think it's just this ability to observe yourself, just the ability you can take a pause and you can think, how do I want to respond to this? Or how do I want to be in this situation? I don't have to just do the same thing as I always did. Yeah. And I think that was what was really powerful.
So it's quintessentially moving from reaction to responsiveness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Taking the pause.
Yeah. And focusing more as much on the being and on the doing. All these are coachy things we all say all the time, but it's so true. It's this sort of, we go through life and we're just in reactive mode. And so it gave you a toolbox that you used in life and in your kids and everything else. So.
Yeah. And I remember one instance in particular with one of my kids who was quite emotionally dysregulated, I'd say, or prone to react over big reactions anyway. And I remember the first time that I applied with him what I would now call the ACE tool, which I didn't call it that specifically, but the idea of validating emotions. Mm-hmm. And I remember the first time I did that with him, and he just froze. He couldn't work out what was going on, because instead of him reacting how he always did and me reacting how I always did, and it's escalating into a drama, I just didn't react. I just acknowledged that, I can see this is really hard for you. And I just remember his face, he was just bewildered. He didn't know what to say. Like, oh. And it was like, now what do I do?
And so we see that so often in this community, is that when we as parents begin to change our approach and the way we're communicating with our kids, that's the change that we want. But often before we start getting the change, we get this like deer in the headlights response of, wait, what's going on here?
I don't know what's going on now. Now what do I do? The interesting thing is that it serves several purposes, because one, you don't get tied into the drama. Yeah. And two, you're modeling exactly what you would like to see at the same time, because by not getting tied into the drama, you're able to then work out what to do next. Once you've got over I can see this is really hard for you, or this is really upsetting for you. What do you think we can do about that? It just shifts everything to a different place.
And the thing I love about what you're saying is that parents say all the time is, but they won't change. They won't change. I'm like, if you change the way you're dancing, and the dance will change. And so it really does make a difference if you just try something different sometimes.
I was on a group we run parent coaching groups. All three of us lead parent coaching groups in this community. And I was on a group with a group of teens. And what we were talking about was this notion of that as parents, we can be an invitation to the change that we want and the change that they want. And so what you're saying, that modeling is really inviting them to approach the world from a different way, in a different way.
Yeah. And I think that was such a game changer with this particular child, that then the reactions became less and less. His reactions became less and less and less.
Yeah.
As a result of my reactions becoming less and less and less.
Right. And so on in all the good ways, right?
Yeah.
We can escalate it and make it worse, but we can also de-escalate it and make it better.
Yeah.
Right? That's what you're speaking to.
And so unravel that just a little bit. What do you think it was that de-escalated it for him in that moment?
Me not taking the bait, I suppose you could say, or just instead of getting into a tug of war about whatever it was, that's not the way to express that, whatever it was. I can't remember what the situation was. Just allowing him to feel that.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing it, right?
Feeling heard, feeling seen, and then moving on to the next thing. It's almost miraculous.
I was going to say, it sounds so simple, and yet it is so outrageously profound.
Yeah. And so then from then on, once I saw that kind of win, that little success, I thought, I'm really onto something now.
Mm-hmm.
So then I started applying it.
And how often do we as humans get into conversation with whoever it is, whether it's our kids or other adults, where we're so focused on what we want to say or getting our point across or making sure that we're right, you're wrong. There's all this sort of, again, that reactivity in our communication. But if we take a step back and go, we're recording this right after Thanksgiving in the US. And so, of course, during the holidays, there's always a little bit of everything in the family. And it's somebody says something, and instead of pouncing in, it's like, if I can take a minute and go, whoa, wait a second, let me just let that be where it is and not have to get involved with it. Sometimes that makes such a big difference in relationship, in communication, all of those pieces.
It's that pause. The way that I was taught it initially, because I took a coaching program that wasn't really a very good one, and then I went into the CTI coaching. The metaphor that I was taught for that pause was a humming. I don't know if you've ever watched a hummingbird, but hummingbirds, which are prevalent in Mexico, they always pause before they flutter around, and then they pause for a moment before they go into the flower.
Mm.
And that was the sort of visual that I had of this hummingbird pausing.
I like that. The hummingbird effect, or something. There's got to be a name to it. I like that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Interesting one.
So you got into coaching, and fast forward a little bit, you got into parent coaching. You were doing
parent coaching because I really felt like that's where I resonated most. Actually, before that, I was doing executive coaching, and I could see that there were so many things in the people that I was coaching that had to do with either them being ADHD and not really knowing about it, or having emotional regulation issues that clearly weren't managed very well in their childhood. And so they were now suffering with it as adults, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so that made me think, parents is where really I want to be. And it was something that really resonated with me anyway. And so then I started doing workshops and things here in Mexico. And then I found impact coaching, impact parents, and thought that what you were doing really resonated even more. Well, it was more of the same in a great package kind of thing.
Yeah, that I always say that we didn't make this up, but we've packaged it really well.
Yeah.
But let's talk about that for a little bit. We were talking about it before we started. And actually, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and dive into that. Okay?
Okay.
Hi, it's Elaine. And if you like this podcast, you'll love our coach approach. Whether you're a parent looking for support or a professional supporting families, we invite you to download a free guide with 12 key coaching tools at impactparents.com/gift. You can begin using a coach approach to help kids become more independent or improve all of your conversations at work and at home. That's impactparents.com/gift. Welcome back, everybody. Our guest is our friend and colleague, Elena Nichols. And we were talking about you started off, Elena, doing coaching, and then you moved into parent coaching, and then you found us. And it was after we were working together for a little bit that I discovered that you were actually the parent of complex kids and hadn't even really seen it through that lens. Will you speak to that a little bit? Because I think this is a common experience in our community.
Yeah. One of my kids is dyslexic, and as is my husband, or was. They've got over it really, but they obviously as children they suffered with it more. And it's funny actually when I think about when I first noticed that she had this struggle, she was struggling to read. It really, I'm not proud of how I reacted at the time. Now, looking back on it, because I had my eldest son who was he would devour books and he was a great reader, and I had somewhere in my brain this idea that if a good mother has children that reads a lot, so I ticked the box with my first. And so then my daughter came along and she was really struggling, and my response to that was, she's letting me down. It was like this, my frustration and my expectations of what a good mother should look like were being shattered because my daughter was struggling to read. She's just so absurd.
But very normal.
Yeah.
How
often do we measure ourselves on our kids' performance? That's exactly what we tend to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really this sort of expectations on ourselves. It's this idea of our expectations for our kids, and then it's expectations of what we think good mothers are. Yeah. What the children of good mothers do, kind of thing. Yes. And
I was going to say, what are their behaviors that make us somehow a good mother?
Right. Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did wrestle with that a little bit, and then realized I was being completely ridiculous. There was this lovely little girl doing her best to read and really struggling, and me feeling frustrated. And what was that about? So then. Yes, we got some support, got some support in place and all sorts of things, and really focused on the strengths, of which turns out there were trillions of her other talents. And so we really focused on the other talents. And lo and behold, years later, she's now 20. The reading thing just hardly even features anymore.
Yeah.
Because
talk a little bit about what happened for you as you began to become educated about neurodiversity and became a neurodiversity informed coach as opposed to a typical coach. What shifted for you?
I think what's interesting about it is that I think everybody can relate to some degree with the neurodiversity. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't consider myself neurodiverse, but there are lots of things that come up that I think, that's a bit me, and that's a bit me as well. So I just think it's interesting. It's a kind of a condition of degrees because we all experience it to some degree, and I find that fascinating. It's just, and some people have a greater degree, and other people have a lesser degree. And the people that have a greater degree tend to have so many other fascinating facets to their personality or to their talents and things, which makes it really interesting to me. I find it really interesting.
There is some subtle difference when you're parenting a young adult, right? It's just sort of, they are living on their own. They are doing all the independent stuff. And so what I really wanted to talk about, because some of the parents listening have teens, or they even have maybe elementary age kids. And it's just sort of, are there things you feel like you get now in a different way that you would want to go back and tell Diane and Andy 10 years ago to maybe handle a little bit differently to prepare yourselves for now in a different way?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it goes back to the first thing I said, especially, he's not doing this on purpose. And, and it took till he was 20 something for him to be able to say, like, do you think I do this on purpose? Like, at some point he said that, and I was like, I don't know. I can't really relate. So yeah, I mean, just being more patient and trying to find out what's going on in his head about school or whatever the issue is that day, or cleaning up his room or whatever it is, as opposed to just do your work and clean up your room, be more curious. What is the reason this issue is going on? I think everybody would have been a lot happier for those 10 years.
Yeah, we often say, don't get curious, not furious. So if you had spent more time with curious, and really what I hear you say is looking at it, at what was going on through his lens.
Yes.
What was it like for him?
And he may not have known, but even just kind of
even asking
or guessing or whatever, what might be going on, even if he can't articulate it. Diane, what would you say?
Oh, and add on to that is to really developing more of a relationship back then around this would have been nice, as opposed to just continually being frustrated and upset with him. And it would have been nice to have been in more of a conversation, even though he was little and not particularly articulate or aware of what was going on or necessarily interested in talking to us. But I feel like another piece of advice that I would have given us would have been to seek out more understanding for our sakes, for the parenting sake, like something like what you do, even if we hadn't found you immediately, to have learned more back then about what we learned a little bit, but certainly not enough to feel the way we do now. And I feel like if we had done a little bit more digging But,
it's so interesting, Diane, because as I hear you say that, like, we've interviewed parents, we've been doing this for so long. And initially, most parents respond by saying, but he's the one with the problem. Why should I focus on me?
Right.
Right. And so what would change that? What would you have needed to hear then to change your openness to that?
I think that if you had told me that 10 years are going to go by and you're going to just be frustrated the whole time.
A time machine would have taken.
Yeah, a time
machine. Oh, I love that.
Would have helped. But, hindsight's 20/20, right?
Right. Exactly.
And with the knowledge that we have now, I would have, and we share impact with our friends.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. A friend, a trusted friend, because, you
need to trust somebody.
Well, yeah, and he saw shrinks and tested and everything. And I honestly, I slowly started believing it, but, it's just so different from my, I would say things like I was bad in school when I was a kid too, or whatever. And, it's just different. So yeah, hearing from a trusted friend would have been huge.
Right. Or a professional. In fact, we've shared impact with his therapist and his psychiatrist and other professionals, because we want them to all know what's helping us. And so if they could share this with their clients, not just a trusted friend, but a trusted professional too, like everybody needs to know about this.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are two issues I want to see if we can kind of address quickly. Mm-hmm. One is he's not your only kid.
Right.
Right. And so, just as you kind of got your handle on supporting him more effectively, what happened? Because this is also we have a
daughter who's older and she's a college graduate, and, she's not too atypical from other college graduates who didn't have much direction. And she had recently gotten an ADHD diagnosis and also had some complex issues that were entrained with the ADHD, which at this point she was in her early 20s when we're first discovering this.
Right.
And so just when he started to seem to be doing better, he got a job, he was really happy, she kind of fell apart.
Yeah.
And it was, we were kind of grateful that it was only one at a time. But at the same time, we were now learning a whole new language of, we had spent like 10 years with our son helping him. And now we were completely different set of issues going on with her. And so we were, again, grateful to be in the support group at Impact, because as Andy was saying earlier, a lot of the issues that some of the other families were having weren't our issues before, but all of a sudden now that we
No, they
had
were.
kids, now it was like we there were a lot more commonalities.
Yeah, we really knew, we felt like we knew how to deal with it, and I think dealt with it quite well, and things are going better.
Way
Yeah.
better.
And that's the thing that I love about this work is, the stuff that you've learned and the tools that you have in your toolbox are things you could have used 10 years ago or things you could use 10 years from now. I mean, it's not, and I love the fact that it's not formulaic. It's not this happens, do this happens, do that. It's really about you and how do you morph and look at the situation and help facilitate change in the system, family system, rather than, okay, I've got a kid with ADHD. Here are the 17 things I need to do.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I use it in my work too. I mean, I work with a lot of Gen Zers who, who some of which exhibit some of these same tendencies, and I think I'm more patient with them too, honestly.
Yeah, I could see that. I remember you saying to me, I'm going to a meeting. You were leaving a group early because you were going to facilitate a meeting. You were like, I'm taking this to that meeting.
Yeah.
I don't even remember what the topic was. But
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, there's things for sure.
So the two of you have really done this in tandem and you've done this together.
Yeah.
And as you know, a lot of people in this group are a single parent in the group, not a couple.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you want to say to parents who may be thinking, I can't do this because my co-parent's not involved, and I wish I could be sitting there with my partner, but I'm not?
It is nice that we are doing it together. I won't deny that.
Yeah.
But there's been times when, for example, we will have just come off of a coaching call and Andy will turn around and be like, we have to do blah, blah, blah. I'm like, wait, we were just coached on not to do that. Let's take what we just learned in coaching. So I think even a single parent could sort of use that well too. Like, okay, the co-parent wasn't on the call and they're not getting the same information, but, here's something that I just learned. Here's how I would handle it instead. Maybe you'd consider that too. So,
yeah. I mean, yes, it would be better to have two, but it's just helpful. I mean, and look, if that's something that somebody else has to deal with, being a single parent or being not a single parent, but the other parent's not on board, then, I think they'd be more happy, as I said, like with themselves, and their relationships will get better with their kid.
I don't think we've talked a lot about communication, but really a lot of what you're talking about was shifting the way that you were communicating.
Big time, because I didn't have a parent that talked to me like that. I had to really learn how to parent in a different way. And either did my husband. It was old-fashioned parenting. You didn't have a voice. You just did what you were supposed to. And we pretty much did, or we silently didn't. We had a kid that was totally different. He was going to use his voice, and he had his own agenda and his way of seeing things and wanting to do things. And how are we going to support him without ever hurting his self-esteem or making him think that he's anything wrong with him? That was so important to me, to hear him and to never let him think that there was anything wrong with him, because there was nothing wrong with him.
Yeah. And it sounds like you did it in a way that wasn't about skirting it. It's your brain's wired differently. And part of that is just finding your language, right? And I think that's the inspiration I want to give to other people listening, is like, what works for one person works for one person. And you've got to find a way to be able to communicate in a way that feels authentic for you as a parent, and in a way that your kiddo can hear it. And you may start here and end up there, but there's this sort of dynamic of, how do I figure out how to engage in this conversation?
A lot of practice, a lot of trial, sometimes failing. We just kept working at it. And I think that's what the small group coaching was so helpful, just to be reminded, like hearing other people's journeys and being able to relate it to myself and just keeping at it.
Well, that was the next thing I was going to ask you about, was talk a little bit about what the experience was for you of being in a community with other parents and how that supported you.
It was awesome because you guys structured it and I could go in different age groups as our son was growing up. And it was just really validating and just great reminders. I'm not taking out my workbook every week and re-examining all my notes, but hearing other people's journeying and be able to apply it to myself. Just practice, repetition, practice, practice, practice.
It's funny. We had I was in a group last week and somebody was brand new to the group. And by the time we started having a conversation, she's the biggest aha for me is I'm not the only one that's going through the same stuff. And it feels so good to just know that there's lots of other parents who are struggling with really smart kids that are struggling, really smart kids who are struggling, who are also pushing up against us and getting help, all of those sorts of things that are so common that we're part of your journey as well, Sonia.
Yeah, I didn't know any parents that were going through this. I really didn't. We were alone.
Yeah. Well, and I think so often we don't think we know what parents going through it. And you begin to find out later, you're going to look back and find out, oh, he wasn't the only kid. Although because you were expats in Europe, I suspect that made that a little bit different for you.
Well, yeah, we were definitely, there wasn't a lot of talking about that at all or support at all.
So the thing I'm curious about, and I like, this is going to become my new question for success story conversations, but it's if you could go back 6 or 7 or 10 years ago, is there some advice that you would give to you and yourself and your husband back then? If you could like magically go back, I've got a magic wand here on my desk. We could take you magically back.
I just wish I knew about you guys when he first got his diagnosis, to be honest with you. I really wish I knew what I know now when our son was just starting out at 7 versus 12. It just would have alleviated a lot of emotional reactions from me, a lot of maybe inadvertent shame from my husband because he couldn't understand. And I just feel like it actually makes me quite emotional. Like I never wanted our son to feel that there was anything wrong with him. So I can't say that there's anything I would tell myself from 6 years ago, because I really feel like we really used you guys. And I think it just really helped.
But before that,
about you guys sooner.
It's really only, I wish I'd known sooner. And I'd laugh with people all the time when they say, I wish I'd known you 10 years ago, 20 years ago. My response is, I do too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we do this because we needed it. And it wasn't there when our kids were diagnosed.
Yeah.
My eldest was diagnosed at 5, which in those days was still the last century.
Yeah.
And I didn't start doing this till they were 12.
Mm-hmm.
And that gap was big. And when I look at the impact on their youngest sibling versus them, because of what I was able to do differently, it's really quite dramatic.
Yep, totally.
And then we want to be really gentle with our previous selves, right? It's sort of, we do as well as we can. And everybody listening, I know, has a beautiful heart that wants to do well for your kids. And so let's not beat ourselves up for what we haven't done yet.
Well, it's that up until now phenomenon. You can't do anything about anything that's happened in the past, but from here forward, you can seek support, you can find community, you can connect, you can ask for help, you can find a different way of being in relationship with your kid and with yourself and with your partner.
Yeah.
Did your husband, after Sanity School, did he stay with you in any of the other coaching, or was it just you and the coaching?
Oh, yeah. We did it together, the one-on-one coaching. And then he did the small group coaching with me while we were abroad. And when we moved back to the US this fall, his work schedule changed. So he hasn't been involved with that much. But yeah, but no, he was along with me. Thank goodness. It was so helpful to have us both supporting our son, not just it coming from me. I wanted, because my son had a lot of respect for my husband. And I think it really helped for him to hear, not just from mom, everything, because mom tends to be the driver. So it was really helpful.
It's true. And I also want to say to those of you who may not have a spouse who's ready to get on board, your husband wasn't on board at the beginning. It took a while to get him on board.
Yep.
And so part of the practice, I always joke that my husband's line was, I couldn't deny anymore that what you were doing was working. That's what got him on board.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you know what that shift was for you that got him on board? Or was it just asking?
My son, I'll never forget it. My son's bilingual because my husband is from another country. And my son said, Dad's more fun, but I can tell mom anything. So to see my son say that I can have a conversation with mom about anything, but you're more fun. I think my husband realized I've got to show up differently. And I told him, you're going to lose him if you don't show up differently when he's a teenager. You need to be able to hold him for who he is. And I just kept repeating that lovingly, and he eventually got it.
Beautiful. So you use the tools from the coach approach to continue to invite your husband to get his ownership and buy-in. And
I didn't see it that way, but I did.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For the essentials of Elaine and Diane's coach approach to parenting, download a free tip sheet at impactparents.com/podcast.
Behavior therapy training for parents is actually recommended as a first-line treatment for complex kids. For information about Sanity School, our training program for parents or teachers, which has helped thousands of families around the globe, visit impactparents.com/Sanity School.